Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is the state of capitalism and what we're doing at Zen to try and evolve it into a system that is sustainable for the future. So let's dive straight in and look at the state of capitalism today. So we want to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of capitalism. And I'm going to start off with the good. So capitalism has a good side that we want to keep. And one of the best bits of it is the free market competition based on survival of the fittest, drives all sort of desirable things: invention, innovation, better products and services, more choice, pace and ambition. So all this stuff, it plays to our innate competitiveness, all stuff that we want to keep. But if you look at capitalism, then sooner or later, you've got to face the harsh reality that the capitalist system that we're all part of is primarily driven by the quest for ever greater amounts of money. And the more, the better. So if you go along to the Bank of England website, you don't need to read for very long before you learn that GDP growth is good, GDP shrinking is bad. As an aside, household spending accounts for about 2/3 of GDP. Here's Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, talking about why economic growth matters. And what he says is GDP growth is a key measure of the overall strength of the economy. Sustained rises in GDP have been shown over the course of history to improve our health, our wealth, and our happiness. Our remit requires us to pick whichever actions will boost economic growth. So we've created a system that is illustrated by this graph. The more we spend, the happier we'll be, the better our well-being. Now, what the science says about that is if you are poor, that is true. For everybody on this call, it is unlikely to be true. So here's some science. This is from Ed Diener, published 250 academic articles on the psychology of well-being. After a certain threshold, there seems to be no correlation between income and happiness. And in fact, in a recent study, it was found that teenagers from blue-collar families were happier than teenagers from rich families. Now, the Bank of England does acknowledge that there are more dimensions to happiness and well-being than how much you spend, and Andy Haldane himself acknowledges that. And they even quote Einstein to say that not all that can be counted counts. But despite what Einstein says, despite what the science says, this graph remains a cornerstone of the capitalist system that we're all part of, and also our economic policy. And that has a number of very undesirable consequences that I want to look at now. The first category of undesirable consequences are the social impact of that pursuit of money. There are lots of examples I could give here, but I'm going to pick some of the key ones. First one, incredible short-termism by companies. And the very best example for me of this was the financial crisis of 2008. This is what The Economist had to say about this. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 almost brought down the world's financial system. It took huge taxpayer-financed bailouts to shore up the industry, the worst recession in 80 years. Under pressure from shareholders to increase returns, banks operated with minimal equity, leaving them vulnerable if things went wrong. The crisis itself caused millions of people to lose their jobs, their savings, their businesses, their homes. One study estimated that the crisis would add 64 million people to the population living under $2 a day. And over a decade later, we're still paying the price. So this is from UK public spending. In 2005, the UK national debt was less than $500 billion, but then came the worldwide financial crisis of 2008 and the subsequent recession. The national debt increased rapidly and went over $1 trillion in 2011. At the end of March 2019, the national debt was $1.8 trillion. Now, of course, because of coronavirus, the national debt's going up even further, now $1.95 trillion, and for the first time since 1963, has exceeded the GDP of the country. Now, Barry Schwartz, Professor of Social Theory and Social Action from Pennsylvania. Wall Street bonuses fueled the crash it created in people who ran companies unbelievable short-termism, because all that matters was making the company look good for what the next quarter or the next year. So they get a huge bonus, and what the consequence was for the company 5 years down the road was of no concern to them: disaster. The crisis itself was caused by financial speculation on a huge scale, so over $1 trillion, using securities backed by subprime mortgages. Values and risk profiles were massively misrepresented, and the whole system was described by Michael Lewis, author of The Big Short, and also the film based on the book of the same name, as one big fraud. And the size of the fraud, the scale of the wrongdoing by the banks, is highlighted by the scale of the fines they've had to pay in relation to the crisis, so over $150 billion by August 2017. And that leads me on to the next big undesirable consequence of this pursuit of money, which is corporate crime. So you would have thought that the finance and banking industry would have learned their lessons from the financial crisis. But if you go along to the Financial Conduct Authority website, you'll see that the fines continue to be dished out for breaking the rules. So this is just a selection from the list from last year. Prudential fined 24 million for mis-selling and the unfair treatment of customers. Standard Life fined 31 million for unfair treatment of customers. Bank of Scotland, 46 million for failing to be open and cooperative. Standard Chartered, 102 million for breaches of the money laundering regulations. Goldman Sachs, 34 million for transaction reporting failures. So that's in the UK. If you go over and have a look in the US, over the last decade, there's been some very high profile cases. So BNP Paribas was fined $9 billion for deliberately disregarding the law and providing rogue nations, and Sudan in particular, with vital access to the global financial system, helping that country's lawless government to harbour and support terrorists and to persecute its own people. SAC Capital Advisors, 1.8 billion penalty for large-scale fraud and insider trading. Credit Suisse, 1.8 billion for conspiracy to help US taxpayers hide offshore accounts from Internal Revenue Service. And then a couple of weeks ago in Germany, 1.9 billion euros missing, and Ernst & Young said there are clear indications that this was an elaborate and sophisticated fraud involving multiple parties around the world in different institutions with the deliberate aim of deception. So that's the financial industry, but if you look in wider industries, there's a similar story. And before I come on to that though, look at this quote from Robert Monks from the award-winning documentary, The Corporation. Again and again, we have the problem that whether you obey the law or not is a matter of whether it's cost effective. If the chance of getting caught and the penalty are less than the cost to comply, people think of it as being just a business decision. So let's have a look at some of those other industries. I mean, one that we'll all know about, Dieselgate. 2009, Volkswagen starts installing defeat devices. September 15, VW admits it used sophisticated software to trick regulators. December 2015, VW admits the scandal was the result of systematic failures and a culture that tolerated rule breaking and misconduct by employees. Over 10 million cars worldwide were produced up to 40 times the US limit of nitrogen oxide emissions, a smog forming pollutant linked to lung cancer. And VW have suffered over 25 billion in damages as a result of that. Moving on, Tesco, 2017, fined 129 million by the UK Serious Fraud Office. Between February and September 2014, instead of working to safeguard the financial interests of the company and its shareholders, a culture existed at Tesco that encouraged illegal practices to meet accounting targets. Rolls-Royce, FTSE 100 company with 50,000 employees, fined 671 million by the UK Serious Fraud Office and authorities in US and Brazil for conspiracy to corrupt, false accounting and failure to prevent bribery. Royal Mail, 2018, fined 50 million for a serious breach of competition law after the company abused its dominant position by discriminating against its only major competitor delivering letters. Last year, Serco fined to 19 million for fraud and false accounting over its electronic tagging service for the Ministry of Justice. And that related to a settlement and compensation they paid in 2013 after overcharging the UK government for electronically tagging criminals following allegations that it was charging for monitoring people who were either dead, in jail, or had left the country. And this year, Airbus fined a record-breaking 991 million euros by the UK Serious Fraud Office as part of a 3.6 billion global settlement for using external consultants to bribe customers to buy its civil and military aircraft. So a quick tour of some examples. One of the problems that we have and one of the challenges that we face with so many organizations putting the pursuit of money above all else is the challenge that crime pays. So consider this image. And actually, an iceberg typically has about 10% of its volume above the water. For this to be an accurate representation, I should push the iceberg down into the water a little bit further, because first of all, a large number of crimes and regulation breaches are never detected. And this is illustrated by the fact that the ones that do come to light have often been going on for years. The majority of crimes and breaches that are detected are likely not reported, and one study estimates that non-reporting could be as high as 96%. The majority of crimes and breaches that are reported do not result in prosecutions. So there were 8,304 prosecutions in the UK for financial crime in 2016. And you know, that doesn't sound too bad until you realise that the number of reported offences was over 640,000. So ratio there, just over 1%. Let's go back to the financial crisis, absolutely the crime of the century in terms of the tens of millions of people who were negatively impacted by that. Countless frauds took place across the banking industry, but only one person actually went to prison, and it was Karim Serageldin, an executive at Credit Suisse, who was sentenced to 30 months in prison for artificially inflating the price of subprime mortgages. The judge in that case said Serageldin's conduct was a small piece of an overall evil climate within the bank and within many other banks. And the final thing in terms of the social impact is that our capitalist system is a giant inequality machine. So everyone in this call is probably paid a reasonable amount of money. If you look within your organizations, there might be people paid a bit more than you, might be people paid a bit less than you, and that's all fine. You know, different jobs command different salaries, and that's right, that's fine. That's how things can work well. That's how businesses can work well. But if you step outside of your business and look at the world as a whole, those differentials get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where they become an obscene level of inequality. So did you know, for example, that the richest 26 people today own the same amount of wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion people? Yes, you heard me right, that 26 people own the same amount of wealth of half of the rest of the human race. You've got to ask yourself, is that right? I mean, to me, that's not right. And I think to many people looking at that level of inequality, they also think, you know, that's not right. We want to shout about, we want to do something about that. So if you look over the last year, country after country, I've seen protest, demonstrations, and a common theme has gone through all those, and that is inequality. So two of many examples that I could give: Chile last October, Minneapolis in May. So those are the social impacts of this pursuit of money. Now let's look at the second category of undesirable consequences, the environmental impacts. So again, some examples. These are the key ones. We've got a climate crisis. So for about 1 million years, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has fluctuated up and down. And then since 1950, it's gone through the roof. And of course, we're all very aware of that now. We're building wind farms, solar farms, we're buying hybrid cars, we're recycling our plastic pots, we're taking out unwanted clothes to the charity shop, all things that are really worthwhile. Question is, what difference is it making? Is it starting to make a difference? The answer, no. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is continuing its linear trend upwards. The temperature of the planet is accelerating. This is an image from NASA from 1970. This is from last year. In terms of the impact, it's pretty well documented. Loss of sea ice, accelerated sea level rise, longer, more intense heat waves, more and stronger hurricanes. In the UK, a decrease in cold spells and an increase in warm spells is clearly linked to climate change, and this trend is expected to continue. Heavy rainfall is also more likely. The Arctic Ocean is expected to become ice-free in summer before mid-century, and the frequency and severity of wildfires is likely to increase. Though developed countries produce most greenhouse gas emissions, developing countries are predicted to see most of the severe effects. With fewer resources to adapt to these changes, the impact on people in developing countries is expected to be higher. Let's move on. The sixth mass extinction in the Earth's history. So this is what National Geographic has to say about mass extinctions. This was from last year. In the last 500 million years, life has had to recover from 5 catastrophic blows. Though the most recent extinction is famous for being caused mainly by a huge asteroid, it's the exception. The single biggest driver of mass extinctions appears to be major changes in the Earth's carbon cycle. So this is from Elizabeth Colbert, 2014. After researching the current mainstream view of relevant peer-reviewed science, Colbert estimates flora and fauna loss by the end of the 21st century to be between 20 and 50% of all living species on Earth. This is from the United Nations from last year. Human actions threaten more species with global extinction now than ever before. Up to 1 million of the planet's estimated 8 million species now face extinction. James Gustav Speth wrote a book called The Bridge at the End of the World, Capitalism, the Environment, and Crossing from Crisis to Sustainability. Inside the leaf of the book, it says, if we continue to do exactly what we are doing, with no growth in the human population or the world economy, the world in the latter part of this century will be unfit to live in. Something is badly wrong, and a deeper critique is needed. Speth contends that this critique leads to a severe indictment of today's economic and political system, capitalism as it now actually operates. Our vital task is to change the operating instructions for the modern economy before it's too late. And finally, on the environmental impact, this from David Attenborough. The future of life on Earth depends on our ability to take action. Many individuals are doing what they can, but real success can only come if there is a change in our societies, our economics, and our politics. I've been lucky in my lifetime to see some of the greatest spectacles that the natural world has to offer. Surely we have a responsibility to leave for future generations a planet that is healthy and habitable for all species. So that's a look at the social and the environmental damage that our current model of capitalism is creating. And if you look at all that, you can see it's unsustainable. It might lead you to ask the question, why do people in positions of power and influence do so much bad and ugly stuff? Now, is it the case that there's a secret selection process where they have to sell their soul to the devil before they take up post, or maybe they've got to turn to the dark side? And the answer to that question is no, of course not. They do it because they live and work in a system that encourages and rewards that behavior. So actually, the problem is not with the people. The problem is with the system, the capitalist system as it operates today. And it's a system that puts money first and people second. And the problem is the system creates the behaviors. It influences us all massively. So for me, it's very clear to me that our capitalist system as it is today is not sustainable. And I've made it my mission in life to evolve the system towards something better, starting at Zen. I know, start at home. So if you look at Zen now and think, okay, well, what are we doing differently to try and evolve capitalism towards something better? And the very best place to start to answer that question is our most fundamental long-term objectives. And those are, in priority order, happy staff, happy customers, and happy suppliers. So these three objectives are the reason we exist as a business, and everything that we do within the organization must contribute ultimately to one or more of these objectives. These objectives enshrine our culture. and it's a culture that puts people first and money second. Now, just a caveat here, although money is second, it is of course critically important. So we all need to work hard, we need to stretch ourselves, we have to grow as a company, we've got to make a profit, we've got to manage our cash and price our products and services competitively, limit our costs, balance short and long-term investment, strive to hit our financial targets and our budgets, all the things that all companies have to do to be successful. But the difference is these are all subservient to the happiness of our staff, customers, and suppliers. And that all creates a culture that has, over the years, been really the secret behind our reputation for service quality. So consistently, we come top of the league table in which for consumer broadband, and the readers of PC Pro have voted us the UK's best broadband ISP every year since 2004. Service improvement programs allow you in an organisation that is primarily financially driven cannot compete with an organisation that genuinely and truly puts people first right throughout the organisation. Now, this culture also nurtures a great deal of loyalty. So loyalty in our people, and over a quarter of our workforce have been with Zen for over 10 years now. 5 people, including me, have been with Zen for over 20 years. It's something that's very heartwarming for me. A job for life, a very old-fashioned idea, but something that actually I really believe in. I think it's not for everybody, but for those people that continue to be challenged, that continue to be developed, that continue to enjoy their work, and that also continue to add value to the organisation, then I think a job for life is a good thing. Also nurtures great loyalty in our customers. So our customer base, if you look at that, 60% have been with Zen for over 5 years, 25% for over 10 years. And of course, that's a great thing to fuel financial success in the long term. You know, focus on the people first, the financial performance will come as a result of that, not the other way around. Having this culture also is a great foundation for continual improvement. So in 2001, I set the mission for the business to provide the best ISP service in the UK. And I went on to say, okay, if we're going to provide the best service, what we need to do is make thousands, tens of thousands of daily continual improvements. So I want everyone in the business to think, how can I do my job better today than I did it yesterday? How can I do it tomorrow better than I'm doing it today? And you really need everybody to be engaged on that journey. It's no good just having the management engaged in it. It's no good just having a small number of continual improvement people looking at it. It really needs the whole company. And having our culture allowed that to happen. And our success over 25 years is much, much more down to tens of thousands of, in isolation, quite trivial improvements than it is to a small number of the big decisions that we've made over the years. It allows us to invest in for the long term. So a great example of this is the build out that we've done for our network into Openreach's telephone exchanges. So we've built 451 exchanges today, and that allows us to provide about 2/3 of our superfast FTTC broadband on our own network from the local exchange where the customer lives or works. Just as an aside, we had this in our reception as it was our popometer. So every time we switched on a new exchange, we put a new green ping pong ball in the tube, and that was good for motivation and awareness. We're currently in the process of a £1 million upgrade to get our network ultra fast capable for full fibre FTTP, and we're going to invest several more million to achieve our ultimate goal of 80% of the UK on our own network from the local exchanges. So these are very long-term investments, and they're investments that dent our profitability for many years. So if we had external shareholders pressuring us for a shorter term return, we couldn't have made these investments. And yet these investments have been absolutely critical to allow us to compete with the big players in the various markets that we operate in. Sales commission. So in 2012, we got rid of sales commission. Why did we do that? Because our second most fundamental long-term objective is happy customers. And that means always do what's right for the customer. But we were financially incentivizing our sales team to maximize their own individual sales. And for a long time, I just thought, you know, this grates with me a bit, but you know what? I've just got to accept it and move on, because that's the way the world is. Salespeople earn commission. It's just a rule of the world. And then I found out that that wasn't a rule of the world, and that other businesses were doing things in a different way, and that some of the science says, actually, this isn't what motivates people necessarily. And let's look at the science. So this, in fact, before we go on that, yeah, this thing that grates with me, maximizing sales is not the same as doing what's right for the customer. Now, it can be the same, but often it's not the same. Now, let's look at the science. So this is from Dan Pink, who did a lot of study and wrote a book called The Surprising Truth about what motivates us. And this is what he had to say about this carrot and stick type reward system. If you do X, you get paid Y pounds. So Dan Pink says, the science tells us that it's an extraordinarily effective way of motivating people for those routine tasks, simple, straightforward, where there's a right answer. It turns out to be a terrible way of motivating people to do creative, conceptual tasks. So we put it in place. This is 8 years ago now. Let's have a look at some of the benefits. Number one benefit maybe is we actually made more sales. And why was that? Well, first of all, the science is true. If one of our sales guys wants to build a relationship with one of our business customers, understand their business, where it is today, what the aspirations are for the future, and then work with them to create a solution that supports that growth ambition and the requirements of today. That is a creative, conceptual task. And so without sales commission, they did that better. They were more trusted, and actually they made a point and continue to make a point of saying, look, you know, I'm not going to earn commission from this sale, so my motivation is to advise you on the best solution. They work on longer term leads. So, you know, since making this change, we've won some of our biggest contracts, some with a FTSE 100, because they're willing to put in 18 months or 2 years of effort before a sale will close. With a commission model, people don't want to wait 2 years to get paid. There were some internal logistical things as well. Actually, the overhead of designing, running a scheme, tweaking it this way, that way, dealing with the exceptions, that's all gone, and people can focus on things that are more productive. Some internal time wasting was avoided as well. So, for example, a salesperson hassling a provisioning person at the end of the month to get a circuit delivered, not because the customer needed it delivered, it's just because he wanted to get paid. I think actually the biggest benefit for me is that our salespeople can now fully align to our culture without a financial incentive to tempt them to do otherwise. So overall, one of our best decisions. B Corp, that's the next thing. So we're going to become a B Corp. We sent our application in May. We're hoping to be accredited by September. Some of you might have heard about B Corp. So it started off in the US, largely because of a recognition of what I'm talking about here. There's 257 companies in the UK. This is from the B Corp's homepage. Certified B corporations are a new kind of business that balances purpose and profit. They're legally required to consider the impact of their decisions on their workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. This is a community of leaders driving a global movement of people using business as a force for good. If you look at the details of B Corp, they had this idea of a triple bottom line. So we at Zen, we've already updated our articles of association. So the directors now have a legal responsibility to deliver this triple bottom line, which is a social benefit, an environmental benefit, and as well, financial performance. So at the end of each year, obviously our accounts are finalized, they're audited, but now we also will produce an annual social impact and environmental impact report, which also will be externally audited. And the two reports together will form, this is the performance of the company overall. Now, we had hoped to be the UK's first B Corp internet service provider, but actually IDnet beat us to it. They've recently become a B Corp, so well done, IDnet. The Zen Business Incubator Scheme. So it's a few of the things that we've been doing within Zen. One of the things that I put in place a few years ago to try and get this culture outside of Zen was to create a business incubator scheme. And so far, there are 3 businesses that have been spawned from this scheme. And one is a jewelry business. This is Lottie and Gray, started by Ashley Ritchie. TechSmart, IT consultancy and training, a software development business and software development training business. And the most recent one is Maximus Housing Organisation, which aims to renovate rundown properties in the centre of Rochdale and also to rehabilitate ex-offenders in the process. So the scheme is all about encouraging employees to start and run their own businesses. Now, a few sort of outline of how the scheme works. So we pay 2/3 of the people's salary in year 1. So I say to people when I've advertised the scheme, I say, if you can think of an idea that you can earn 1/3 of what you're earning today in the first year, you'll take home the same as you're taking. Actually, if you can think of an idea where you can earn more than 1/3 of what you're earning today in the first year, you'll actually be better off in the first year compared with staying at Zen. The second year it goes down to 1/3, third year it goes down to nothing. It's got to sustain itself. There's a full package of business support we give for 3 years, so business advice, mentoring, a whole load of support in IT, accountancy, HR, legal, marketing, free office space, internet services. And if it doesn't work out, we say, well, Zen will endeavour to re-employ you. Obviously, it's dependent on us having a suitable vacancy. So I personally take a 75% stake in these businesses, and that stake will transfer, hopefully at some point towards the back end of this year, into the Zen Foundation, which I'll talk about next. There's a commitment never to sell, and this is where we totally go in the opposite direction to private equity. So private equity, the idea is invest in a business, let it grow, exit, and there's the return. Actually, with this scheme, there's a promise never to sell. Lock the shares away forever. So there's never any financial benefit, but we can keep the culture. And then if the business is successful, 5% of pre-tax profits go back to the Zen Foundation from year 5 onwards. So let's talk a bit, I just want to talk a bit about the Zen Foundation. So this is something that it will be a charity with the aim of evolving capitalism to a new sustainable model. And the Zen Foundation will hold all the shares from the business incubator businesses and just lock them away forever. That's the plan. The other big benefit of this is it will allow me to raise funds for more startups. So I've got an aspiration to do many more startups through this scheme to go external to Zen as well. At the moment, Zen is funding all these startups. And of course, Zen is going to be limited in the number of startups it can fund. So I would like to attract external money from people that share my beliefs so I can fund more of these startups. So if anyone listening today has a motivation to put some of your own money in this, do get in touch. Currently, I'm drafting the application for the Charities Commission. And I'm writing a book all about the stuff in this presentation. I have no idea if anyone will be interested in publishing it, but I'm going to write it in any case. Got to about 30,000 words so far, so I reckon I'm about a quarter of the way through. I've talked a lot earlier about the evils within the banking and the financial industry. So one idea I had was, well, why not set up a Zen bank? And even if I could take a tiny amount of market share away from the big players, that would be a worthwhile thing to do. So I had a chat with this guy, Bevis Watts, he's the CEO of ethical bank Triodos. 2 long discussions. He let me know that starting a bank is very expensive and very difficult to do. But actually, the bigger thing that came across is, why would I go through all the trouble of doing it when Triodos have already done it? I could use my time for better effect. So the Zen Bank idea went in the bin, and rather I thought, what I want to do is promote what Triodos does. So here is a mini plug for Triodos. I have one of their current accounts. Their current account costs £3 a month. Now, before that puts you off to the idea of paying for a current account, you need to have a think about two things. First of all, making the world a better place doesn't come for free. Actually, in this case, it's £3 a month. Secondly, is a lot less than you've already paid and will continue to pay for the financial crisis. So that's Triodos. So those are some things about our culture. I'm very keen to secure those things for our future. It's very clear to me that Zen can't ever be part of the stock market. It can't ever be owned by private equity. Now, I've made a commitment never to sell my shareholding in Zen. I wouldn't sell Zen for all the tea in China, in fact. But sooner or later, and hopefully it will be a long time in the future, I'm not going to be around. So what's going to happen then? Well, I've made provision in my will for my shareholding to go into a trust. When the Zen Foundation is set up, the shares will go into the Zen Foundation. And I've written a letter of wishes to my trustees. And my letter of wishes basically says, stick to our values, don't sell out. So that's the best I can do to try and secure the values that we've all created over the last 25 years. I wanted to finish off this presentation with just look at coronavirus, and actually coronavirus has had a devastating impact on many, many lives. It's having a devastating impact on economies around the world, and I don't want to in any way take away from those impacts. But the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining, and I believe that there are some silver linings that we can learn from the current crisis. And I want to start off with the environmental benefits. So this shows the amount of nitrogen dioxide over China between January and February, and similar pictures have been seen over Europe and over the US. And if you look at CO2, so this is the biggest cause of global warming, there's been a drop to, at the low point, 17% globally in CO2 levels. So that takes it to the sort of similar level to the level it was in 2007. If you take the year as a whole, 2020, we could see emissions fall by up to about 5%. But the scientists are telling us that's still less than the reductions we need every year this decade to avoid disastrous climate impacts for much of the world. In terms of environmental benefits, there are many localized things, things like the canals in Venice were reported to be a lot cleaner. But this story stood out for me in particular, that some Indian people were seeing the Himalayas for the first time due to the veil of air pollution lifting. So in terms of fossil fuel pollution, I suppose an ask for everyone on this call is consider making your next car all electric. This is my Jaguar I-Pace, which I've had for just over a year. And what I'd say, it's got plenty of range, it's quiet, it's smooth, it's fast, altogether lovely. So brilliant, little plug there. We're buying less stuff, so reducing our consumption of the Earth's limited resources. And I just want to have a quick focus on plastic toys. And if you're a parent, you'll know the story. Your kid goes to lots of birthday parties, and then there's Christmas, and there's a duty to buy presents for your kids' friends, of which there are many. And many times these are cheap plastic toys. Not like in the old days where toys were made to last years and even handed down from generation to generation. No, much more disposable. Plastic toys account for 90% of the toy market. They're pretty much impossible to recycle. And this is what Steve Rowe, CEO of sustainable toy company Big Future Toys, said about the situation with plastic toys. They're cheap, they break easily. Most of the time they end up in the trash. It was totally incongruent for us to buy these toys for our kids for their edification and enjoyment. We're actually harming their environment that they're going to live in for the rest of their lives. We've got to ask the question, are children actually any happier as a result of this additional consumption and waste? Home working, of course, big topic for coronavirus, and here are 9 of our guys are working at home. We made a big discovery, which is we can run Zen 100% effectively with just about all our people working from home. If you would have asked me 3 months ago, what do you think of home working? I would have said, it's a good thing. more flexibility, better work-life balance. I could never have imagined more than a small minority working from home at any one time. And I was still trapped in a limiting assumption, which is for the business to work, we need the majority of people in the office collaborating. Actually, collaboration since the lockdown has actually, ironically, improved. So a good thing. They don't need to be next to each other. Our HR director said, we can now recruit from anywhere in the world. No, before we thought commute distance to Rochdale, commute distance to our office in Leeds, and that's gone. Of course, there are environmental benefits, less commuting. The people that do commute, there's going to be less congestion. Actually, we need less office space. You know, we've got a big office in Rochdale. We don't need all that space. We did a survey of people probably about 3 or 4 weeks into the lockdown. I'll prefer it when I'm back into the office, 8%. I'd like to stay working from home at least some of the time, 82%. Chilled either way, 10%. So you can see a definite sort of trend there. And we've had a raft of reports from our people of improved work-life balance and improved well-being, you know, less rushing about. Actually, we live in a very busy world and there's less rushing about, appreciating the simple things in life, cooking a nice meal, going for a walk, less choice. And you think, hang on a minute, less choice is bad, isn't it? Well, not necessarily. I've already quoted Barry Schwartz. He wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less. By synthesizing current research in the social sciences, Schwartz makes the counterintuitive case that eliminated choices can greatly reduce the stress, anxiety, and busyness of our lives. Doesn't suit everyone, but actually it suits a surprising number of our people. And the last coronavirus silver lining is a greater sense of community, you know, and whether that is Thursday evening, going out your front door, clapping for the NHS, banging your pots, maybe helping your neighbours with shopping, helping your neighbours with picking up prescriptions. There has been a greater sense of community. There was a survey done by YouGov just 2 weeks into the lockdown, and 40% of the respondents reported a stronger sense of community in my local area. And we've also seen a stronger sense of community within the workplace as well. And I think, you know, one reason for that is that we're all fighting a common invisible external enemy. But I think another reason for it is that in the workplace, through Zoom, through Teams, we're letting each other into our homes and into our personal lives to an extent. So those are some silver linings. Let's finish off. So I want to try and pull all that together into conclusion. And my conclusion is today's capitalist system is not sustainable for the well-being of humanity or the sustainability of the environment. It needs to evolve into something better. I've got a feeling that our world leaders will not be the catalyst for that evolution. I believe the evolution of capitalism that we desperately need will come from businesses that choose to operate in a different way and from each and every one of us. So we need to create a movement of an increasing number of people for World 2.0. We all absolutely have a part to play in making it happen. Thank you very much. That's me done.